It was the summer before my sophomore year when I found myself pacing back and forth in a rented room at a hostel in Toronto. I had flown there for a short summer research program, but the real reason was something far more practical. I needed housing for the fall semester. Tuition had chewed through most of my savings, and the university dorms were overbooked. Every decent listing I found online was either already taken or way over budget. The only way I could afford to stay near campus was if I found someone willing to split the rent. Out of desperation, I posted an ad on a local student board and even threw one up on Craigslist. I wasn't picky. I just wanted someone quiet, respectful, and not a complete mess. I expected responses from students, maybe the occasional young professional. What I got instead was a reply from someone named Dorothy. The message was polite, almost too formal, and signed off like a letter from another era. She said she was 70 years old, retired, and looking for company. More than anything, I hesitated. It wasn't what I'd imagined, and something about it felt off. But she offered to pay half the rent up front and sounded stable enough. After a full week without any better leads, I caved. We exchanged a few emails and everything checked out, at least on paper. Her background seemed clean. I visited the apartment with her once and everything looked fine. Small, old-fashioned, but livable. The building sat on a quiet side street in the annex neighborhood, not far from the university, nestled between old row houses and overgrown gardens. We agreed to move in by early August. When I first met Dorothy in person, she seemed pleasant, even sweet, short and pale with long silver hair braided neatly behind her back. Her voice was light, almost whispery, like it didn't want to disturb the air around it. She moved slowly, deliberately, and kept her hands folded when she wasn't using them. It reminded me of my grandmother. The first few days were quiet. She mostly stayed in her room, only emerging to make tea or water the dusty houseplants on the windowsill. At night, I'd hear her shuffling down the hall, soft footsteps, punctuated by the occasional cough or creak of a floorboard. Then came the laughter. It started faint, like something barely caught by the edge of hearing. I'd be sitting in the living room watching TV when I'd hear it. Just a short, high-pitched giggle, then silence. At first, I thought she was on the phone. But when I mentioned it in passing one morning, she blinked at me like she didn't know what I meant. From then on, I started noticing more things: how she never invited anyone over, how she always locked her door from the inside even during the day. Once I passed her room and heard her talking to someone, but the cadence didn't sound like a phone call. It was more like a conversation with no replies. Or replies I couldn't hear. Something wasn't right. I couldn't say exactly what, but every time I walked past her room, I felt a chill run up my spine, like the air near that door was different, still heavy. And that laugh, it never stopped completely. It just faded into the walls, always waiting for the quiet to return. I didn't know it then, but that house wouldn't just test my nerves. It would threaten my sanity. The first real fracture came on a Wednesday night. I was up late cramming for a midterm, buried under notes and half-finished assignments. The apartment was dead quiet, save for the occasional rustle of my papers and the hum of my desk lamp. And then just past 3 in the morning, I heard it. A knock. Soft. Almost hesitant, but unmistakable. It came from my bedroom door. I froze. It wasn't the kind of knock someone makes when they want to be heard. It was the kind you make when you're trying not to be. A gentle tap, 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 drawn out and deliberate. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of how dry it was. "Dorothy," I asked aloud. Silence. I stood up and crossed the room, my footsteps muffled against the hardwood floor. When I reached the door, I hesitated, placing my ear close. There was a sound, a faint one. Breathing. Just on the other side, shallow, ragged, uncomfortably close. "Dorothy," I said again, louder this time. This time, a whisper came through. But it wasn't a word. It was laughter. That same giggle, high-pitched, breathless, followed by the soft padding of footsteps retreating down the hall. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to bring it up casually over breakfast. Dorothy was sitting at the table, stirring her tea with her usual slow, practiced motions. "Hey, did you knock on my door last night?" I asked, watching her carefully. She didn't look up, just shook her head. "I was asleep, must have been dreaming," she said, her voice flat. I wanted to argue. Tell her I knew what I'd heard, but something in her tone made me stop, like the conversation was over before it had started. Later that day, I checked the hallway. Something compelled me to do it. My door didn't have a lock, but I wanted to see if there were any signs, anything to confirm what I felt in my gut. That's when I noticed it. One of the kitchen knives was missing. There had been 5. Now there were 4. I asked Dorothy if she'd been cooking anything unusual. She smiled and said, "No." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I started sleeping with a chair wedged under the doorknob. The tension in the apartment grew unbearable over the next week. I kept noticing small, almost imperceptible changes. My toothpaste cap twisted off when I swore I'd closed it. The angle of my bedroom chair ever so slightly, off-center, my laptop lid halfway open when I knew I had shut it the night before. I set up my phone to record one night, propping it on the bookshelf across from my bed. In the morning, the footage was blank for hours, until around 3:17 a.m. That's when I saw her, Dorothy. She was in my room, just standing there, perfectly still, watching me sleep. She stayed like that for nearly 4 minutes. Then she turned to the camera, smiled faintly, and walked back out. I nearly vomited. My hands trembled as I replayed the video again and again. There was no ambiguity, no misinterpretation. She had entered my room in the dead of night and stood over me like a specter. When I confronted her that afternoon, her response was terrifyingly calm. "You talk in your sleep," she said with a smile. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." That night, I installed a second chair under the knob. 3 days later, I woke up to find a note on my pillow. It was written in precise, old-fashioned cursive. "You don't need to be afraid I would never hurt you, not unless you make me." There were no fingerprints, no sound in the night, nothing on my camera. I started researching Dorothy's name online, desperate to find something, anything. A record, an obituary, a public post. But nothing came up. It was like she didn't exist. And the laughter, it grew louder, more frequent. Now I could hear it echoing behind the walls at all hours, like the apartment itself was amused at my unraveling. I stopped leaving my room after dark. I stopped sleeping altogether. And still she watched. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave. I packed a duffel bag with just enough for a few nights and planned to crash at a friend's place across town. I figured I'd wait until morning, but something made me pause. There was no laughter that night. The apartment was utterly silent for the first time in weeks, and Dorothy's door was open, wide open. I should have walked away, but curiosity or maybe some deeper instinct took over. I crept toward the door, the hallway darker than usual, shadows clinging to the edges like mold. Her room was barren, just a twin bed with perfectly tucked sheets, a single bookshelf and a small desk. Everything dustless, unused. But the back wall was wrong. The wallpaper there had peeled slightly, revealing the edge of what looked like a door frame underneath. My heart pounded. I stepped closer, fingers trembling, and pulled at the loose wallpaper. More of it came away easily, and underneath, yes, there was a narrow wooden door, painted the same dull beige as the walls. No knob, but it opened with a push. It led to a stairwell, crumbling steep, leading downward into absolute darkness. I turned on my phone flashlight and descended slowly. The air grew colder with each step, the silence pressing against my eardrums like cotton. At the bottom there was another room, low-ceilinged concrete, and in the center a mattress, stained, surrounded by dozens of dolls, not the cute kind, handmade faceless, stitched with thick black thread, some missing limbs all facing the same direction, toward a wall covered in photos. Photos of me, sleeping, eating, showering, hundreds of them. Some were printed, some were Polaroids, some were even charcoal sketches. In the corner was a tape recorder. Laughter echoed through it as it played. Dorothy's laugh. I backed out of the room, stumbling, barely able to breathe. I turned and sprinted up the stairs, but halfway up I heard her voice behind me. "You found it," she whispered. "The light went out," I screamed. I don't remember the exact moment I started running. 1 second, her voice was right behind me, coiled with delight and menace. And the next, my feet were slamming against the stairs, heart pounding in my ears like a war drum. I didn't care where she was, I just needed out. I burst into the hallway, crashed into the kitchen table, and didn't stop. I didn't look back. Not even when I heard her laugh again this time, louder, rising and rising like something no longer fully human. I threw open the front door barefoot and shaking and sprinted down the street, my lungs searing with cold air. I made it 3 blocks before I collapsed outside an all-night diner, panting and wild-eyed. Someone inside must have seen me, because the next thing I remember, a waitress had draped a jacket over my shoulders, and someone else was calling 911. When the police arrived, I told them everything. Or I tried to. My words were all over the place, mumbling about dolls and photographs and hidden doors. I must have sounded insane. But they took me seriously, if only because of how terrified I looked. They entered the apartment with flashlights drawn. I watched from the back of an ambulance, fingers locked around a warm cup of water. I couldn't bring myself to sip. I waited for someone to come back out. Waited for one of the officers to tell me I'd imagined it all. But they didn't. Instead, 2 of them emerged looking pale and speechless. A third radioed in something quietly. I saw them carry out a box. Then another. I never saw what was inside. I never wanted to. They never found Dorothy. Not in the hidden room. Not in the apartment. Not anywhere in the building. All her belongings were gone. The room I'd found, the concrete basement filled with dolls and photos, was sealed off by morning. No official report was ever released. I was told it was under investigation, and that was the last I ever heard of it. I left Toronto that week. I withdrew from school, packed what little I had left from the apartment, and stayed with family out west. I didn't speak to anyone from that life again, didn't respond to emails, changed my phone number. But I couldn't change what happened. I couldn't unsee that smile, couldn't unhear that laughter, and worst of all, I couldn't stop dreaming about her. Every few weeks I'd wake up, gasping, heart racing, convinced I heard footsteps outside my door, or a soft knock. Just 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. She's still out there. It's been 4 months since I left that apartment, and not a single night has passed without thinking about her, Dorothy. I moved across the city, changed my phone number, even started seeing a therapist, though I never told them the full story. How could I? An old woman tried to kill me after living in my walls for weeks. Doesn't exactly invite a productive clinical dialogue. But I thought it was over, I really did, until yesterday. When I got home from class, there was a letter taped to my front door. No return address, no stamps, just my name written in a shaky, familiar hand. I stood there for 5 minutes before opening it. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed the inside of my current apartment. Specifically my bedroom. There was something written on the back in the same handwriting. I miss your laugh. That night I flipped every piece of furniture, tore apart every closet, checked every vent. Nothing but I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the walls, every gust of wind outside. It all sounded like her, like she was watching. This morning I visited my old landlord. I needed answers, closure, something, anything. He looked at me strangely when I said the name Dorothy. Then slowly he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were at least 4 different complaints written by previous tenants over the past 15 years. All of them mentioned the same things. An old woman who wasn't on the lease. Strange laughter at night, doors opening on their own, knife marks on the bedroom door, and then this one handwritten note by a tenant from 2009, it said, "I don't think she's a person. I think she's something that wears a person's face." T 30 years old, I had finally managed to do something that once felt impossible. I bought my first home. It wasn't glamorous. The shutters were peeling, the porch creaked, and the neighborhood had a reputation that made my friends raise their eyebrows. But it was mine. And after years of long shifts, cheap meals, and sleeping in noisy apartments, owning a place felt like I'd crossed some invisible finish line. To my surprise, most of the neighbors were friendly. Some invited me to dinner, others dropped off baked goods or just stopped by to chat. It was more community than I'd ever experienced. Almost unnaturally warm, but I didn't question it. I tried to be neighborly in return, except for one house. 2 doors down lived a man I couldn't quite figure out. Maybe in his early 50s, deep lines in his face, a permanent scowl, and always wearing the same dark flannel, no matter the weather. He didn't come by with food or introduce himself like the others. Instead, he showed up every few nights at my door. Always late, always asking for something. The first time it was a piece of leftover bread, another night a bucket of water because his pipes were acting up. Weird, but manageable. I chalked it up to bad luck or bad planning, but when he asked me for money one night, something in me said enough. I started ignoring his knocks, letting the doorbell echo unanswered as I sat quietly behind the curtains. but he kept coming, same cadence, same late hours. His persistence felt less like need and more like intrusion. Then came the night that changed everything. It was close to midnight when I heard the knock again. I almost stayed put. But something curiosity or guilt made me check the peephole. He looked different. Not desperate for food or cash this time, but anxious, sweaty, uncomfortable. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "I just got a new grill," he said, breathless. "Can't figure it out. Could you come show me how to use it?" I blinked now. "Yeah, it'll take 2 minutes. I can't get it started." I hesitated. It was a bizarre request, especially at this hour, but I liked grilling. Maybe this was him trying to extend a peace offering, or at least connect in a normal way. "Sure," I said. "Let me grab my shoes." He thanked me and walked back to his house. A few minutes later, I followed. I pushed open his backyard gate and stepped into darkness. No porch lights, no soft window glows, just deep, heavy black. I squinted, looking for the grill. Nothing. And he wasn't out there either, but the back door was wide open. "Hey, I called you still out here." A voice floated up from the shadows just inside. "Yeah, I'm downstairs. Freezer's in the basement. I need help grabbing the meat." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on my neck rise. I stepped into the doorway but didn't move further. "Can you turn on a light?" A pause. "Nah, lights are busted. Just come down. Won't take long." His tone had shifted, less casual, more deliberate, and that's when I felt it. That ancient primal sensation in the pit of my stomach. The one that tells you when something is deeply, deeply wrong. I didn't know why, but suddenly I had this terrible creeping thought. I wasn't there to help him cook. I was the one being prepared. I ran home. I heard his footsteps rushing up the basement stairs behind me. I didn't sleep that night. When I got back to my place, I locked every door, drew every curtain, and sat on the couch with the lights on. My hands were still shaking. The sound of his footsteps charging up those basement stairs replayed over and over in my head like a broken loop. He hadn't followed me. At least I didn't think so. But the silence afterward, no call, no knock, no confrontation, somehow made it worse. It felt like an unfinished sentence, like something was still hanging there, waiting. The next morning, I skipped my usual routine and worked from home. Every sound outside set my heart racing, a dog barking, tires on gravel, a mail truck's squeaky brakes. I peeked through the blinds constantly, but his house looked exactly the same. Still quiet. By the third day, I began to convince myself that maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe he really had just wanted help. Maybe he ran up the stairs because I startled him. Didn't make sense, but it was better than assuming the alternative. The night I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A knock. Not on the front door. On the back 1-3. Slow, deliberate thuds. I froze. Toothbrush still in hand, foam on my lips. My bathroom window faced the backyard, and through the narrow glass pane, I could just make out the shape of a figure standing near the edge of my porch. Not close, just there, watching. I backed out of the bathroom slowly and made my way into the kitchen. I flipped off the light so I could see better out the back window. But when I looked, nothing. The porch was empty. I waited, listening, heart hammering in my chest. Then I noticed something even worse. The back door was unlocked. I never left that door unlocked. Never. I locked it immediately and went through the rest of the house, checking every window and entrance. Everything wanted me to know. I started sleeping with a baseball bat beside my bed. I stopped leaving the house unless I absolutely had to. At work, I was distracted. My boss noticed. Friends noticed. I lied and said I was going through something personal, which I guess wasn't entirely false. I installed a camera above my front door, another in the backyard, and one more just inside the living room window. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want them to talk me out of it. The first night with the cameras running, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the live feeds on my phone. Nothing. The second night, same thing. But on the third night, at exactly 2:46 a.m., I saw him, the man from 2 doors down. He walked into frame slowly, calmly, like he knew exactly where the blind spots were. He didn't approach the house, just stood there at the edge of the backyard, half shrouded by the tree line, watching. Then he turned and vanished into the dark. I played the footage back over and over. I wanted to believe it was a glitch or that I'd imagined it. But no, he was there. And worse, he knew where my cameras were. A few nights later, something even stranger happened. I found a slip of paper wedged into the crack between my door and the frame. No envelope, no name, just a single line printed in perfect blocky handwriting. You left your light on. That same night, I got an alert from the camera inside the living room. It had detected motion at 3:12 a.m. When I pulled up the feed, the room was empty, still silent. But on the far edge of the frame, barely visible in the low light, was a reflection in the window. A man's face. Looking in, I finally broke. I called the police, told them everything about the basement invitation, the unlocked door, the note, the cameras, everything. 2 officers came out to speak with me. They were polite but clearly skeptical. One of them asked if I had a history of anxiety. The other gave me a pamphlet on neighborhood watch groups. They did at least agree to stop by the man's house. I watched from my window as they knocked. Waited. No answer. One officer tried the door. It opened, slowly, creaking. They disappeared inside. Minutes passed. Then more 10, 20, a half hour. When they returned, their faces had changed. Gone was the polite skepticism. They came back over, but this time they didn't wait for me to invite them in. "Do you know how long that house has been abandoned?" one of them asked. I stared at him. "What?" "According to property records, no one's lived there for almost 3 years. We found mail from 2 years ago, piled inside. Utilities were cut last spring." "That's not possible," I whispered. "We didn't find any furniture." The second officer said, "No food, no bedding, just debris." And in the basement, he hesitated. "There's a door that leads into a tunnel. It's been covered up mostly, but someone's been going in and out recently. It doesn't lead to the street. It runs under the yards." I felt a chill creep up my spine. Under the yards. Yes, and it pops up in several places. One of them, he didn't have to finish. I already knew one of them was my backyard. The police promised they would investigate the tunnel. They sealed off the entrance at the abandoned house and said they'd bring in a team. But I couldn't sleep, knowing that someone or something might still be able to get into my property from beneath. So the next day I called in a contractor. I told him I needed a crawl space inspection. I lied and said I was hearing animals under the house. He came that afternoon, climbed down, and didn't say a word for almost 15 minutes. When he finally emerged, his face was pale. "There's something down there," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "There's a hatch." reinforced. Doesn't look like part of the original foundation. And someone's been there recently. There were blankets, a bucket, footprints. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I asked if he could seal it. He shook his head. I'm not touching that. You need the police. I called them again. This time they came fast. The same 2 officers. When I showed them the crawlspace entrance from my own home, they exchanged a glance that made my blood freeze. They went down together, flashlights cutting through the darkness. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then I heard it. A scream. One of the officers came back up alone, panting, shouting into his radio. The second officer, he was missing. They evacuated the street. I was taken to a hotel. For 48 hours, my home was treated as a crime scene. When they finally debriefed me, they didn't have much to say. The second officer hadn't been found. The tunnel system was older than anyone realized, likely dug decades ago and reinforced since. But the thing that stuck with me most was what the officer told me before I left. We found dozens of routes, some dead ends, some still active. But the worst part wasn't the tunnels. He paused. It was the recordings, dozens of tapes of you sleeping, eating, just existing. I didn't respond. What could I say? Someone had been living under my house, watching me for months. I sold the house within 3 weeks. Didn't even bother moving everything. I packed my essentials, left most of the furniture, and accepted the first cash offer that came through. I didn't care about the price, I just wanted out. I moved 2 states over. Got a job in a city where no one knew my name. Found an apartment on the 15th floor of a high-rise with security cameras, keypads, and concierge staff. A place where no one could sneak into my backyard. For the first time in months, I slept. Deep, dreamless sleep. Weeks passed, then months. And then just last week, something happened. I got home from work to find a package at my door. No return address, no postage, just a small cardboard box sitting dead center on my welcome mat. Inside, a roll of undeveloped film and a single note. You forgot the basement light this time.